I'm Brandon Amoroso, and this is the D2Z Podcast, building and growing your business from a Gen Z perspective. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into D2Z, a podcast about using the Gen Z mindset to grow your business. I'm Gen Z entrepreneur Brandon Amoroso, former founder of Electric, and now the co-founder of Scaleless. And today I'm talking with Casey Cheshire, who's the founder and chief evangelist at Ringmaster Conversational Marketing, designing, producing, and promoting customer connection focused B2B podcasts. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, man. Great to be here.
So before we dive into the world of podcasting, unironically on a podcast, can you give everybody a quick background on, sort of your entrepreneurial journey and how you ended up in this space?
Well, it all started a few years ago when I was a child selling raspberries in the neighborhood. It starts out small, but I had been iterating and trying to make like little companies here and there for a long time. But my big breakout was about a decade ago when I launched a B2B like B2B like marketing tech agency. We did a lot of work with Salesforce and Pardot, and we just went from 0 to 30 employees almost overnight for a couple of years, and then just ran that for about a decade. So that was the real big one, but I had a lot of practice swings before that. And then now we're doing this podcasting business.
What made that one the big one versus the small swings?
It's a good question. Well, you can only pick so many raspberries, but I had some other projects. One example, I wrote a play and I thought, let me just publish that, maybe make a play publishing company. Not totally understanding that what a play publishing company is basically reading a bunch of shitty plays to find the one diamond in the rough. And then after you've done all that front loaded work, you publish it and market it, and then maybe you'll get paid. So I think a lot of it was following passion, but not understanding maybe the underlying business model beneath, a company. And so that would be a bunch of the swings were just, following passion, seeing if you could monetize, and then understanding what the core business was. Did I want to read a bunch of bad plays to pick one and then market the hell out of that and then have so much front loaded cost? Not really. So then I realized that was not for me. But with the Pardot business, I loved Pardot, and I was using it in my marketing career just as a marketer, right? And so then what ended up happening is people were like, hey, that's a great story you told about turning that company around using that tool. Could you help me out with it? And there was a model beneath it. There was the ability to have consulting and great ratios. So we could hire really good people, charge a whole bunch, and grow the company. And then also I'd say a great partner, right? So we had a huge partner with Pardot and eventually became Salesforce, but they sent us the majority of our deals. Mm-hmm. So we had like a very mutual partnership with them.
Oh, that's awesome. That's not dissimilar from how mine was able to scale.
Yeah. With Shopify, did they send you most of the love?
Klaviyo, a lot of Klaviyo. Some Shopify as well, but not as much as Klaviyo.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a huge movement in 2019. I think it was 2019, 2020, when the Shopify MailChimp relationship was deprecated. And they basically told their merchants, you should migrate to Klaviyo. That caused a lot of migration work, a lot of growth for Klaviyo, not a lot of service providers for Klaviyo. Now there's a ton, there are a dime a dozen, but at that time, it was very much so sort of a white space for us to dive in.
Market timing, man, is crazy, right? You just hit that market timing, right? But you couldn't just be there that moment. There's a little bit of that groundwork, the relationships, establishing some expertise, and then the market timing flipped, and then it's like grab the fishbowl, time to go, hire.
Yeah, we were already very well steeped in the entire Shopify ecosystem.
Yeah,
so it was just sort of seeing the writing on the wall that we should double down on this and pivot our agency into just being focused on customer experience and retention marketing. That's versus smart. Trying to do everything for everyone.
Yeah.
So it was a mix of timing and then also just being able to pivot into something and go head first versus trying to have our toes in trying to have our hands in too many baskets.
Yeah. Picking the battles is tough. You kind of want to do everything.
Yes. I remember firing my first client and how weird and bittersweet it was, because it was like, I'm losing revenue, but I feel awesome.
I remember the first time someone asked if they could like a la carte, pick apart a program. And instead of doing 12 months, I just want to do 1 month as like a POC. And my response was no. And they didn't go for it. Neither did I. Yeah, I felt so good after that call. I like told everybody, I was like, I just said no. It was awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the amount of time and hassle that you saved yourself, there's almost no chance, I think, that person would have converted anyways. It's
Yeah.
something that I saw all the time. The more that you would bend for somebody to try and get them across the line, more often than not, it was never enough. So,
yeah. It's a whole give a mouse a cookie, and then they want a glass of milk, and then they want a blanket, and then a nap, and then eventually pancakes. You're like, why am I making pancakes for these people? It's crazy.
Yes, the scope creep becomes pretty tremendous.
Yeah. And I also find there's like an inverse relationship to that with their appreciation of it. The more you like sort of bend and you try to give and be flexible with that, the less they appreciate it, which is just so counterintuitive.
No, you're like, what do you mean Brandon's not available at 3 a.m. on a Saturday night to deal with whatever shit I have to send over now? That was a big transition for us, especially as we grew. My early clients, they were used to me 24/7 doing anything and everything for them. And then obviously that's not a sustainable, like, long-term business model. And so as we grew, it wasn't me servicing the account, but also we had to have sort of guardrails in place. I couldn't work for $5 an hour anymore because I wasn't just getting started and like helping them out. And that was definitely a tough transition.
And it can be tough, especially if you're having fun, right? I had a great mentor who made me calculate out, okay, how much are they paying you per month? Cool. What are how many hours do you think you're doing? And the math turned into like, oh, you're getting paid a fraction of what your agency would charge for like your entry level person. But I was I was just doing too much, and I wasn't, because I was having fun. But it's like, okay, you need to like rein it in, have some guide rails here, so you're not, accidentally letting them take advantage of you.
Yeah, part of that maturation process for our business was instituting a time tracking process.
Smart.
And then our worst offender was revealed. And, especially during COVID, access to people was so easy via Slack, email, phone calls. Everybody was just always online all the time. And so I think our effective hourly rate for that client, who was paying us like $20,000 a month, was like $16 an hour. Because
weird, right? You wouldn't think that. You think, oh, it's a great client.
I know, and without that time tracking, I would have had no idea. $16 an hour, and the one-off calls, the Slacks here and there, the hey, let me go down to the. Brandon said no, but let me weasel my way into the the right person within the team to be able to get them to do something for me. It was never ending.
You might have been losing money on that $20K.
Oh, we were for sure. I mean, it made our top line look better, and it made me feel better, but it didn't actually help or support the business. And when we fired them, the team was pumped, and that was the easiest sign that we had done the right thing.
Priceless morale building right there.
Exactly.
You know what, top line metrics, like I definitely have fallen in the trap of like either revenue or even number of employees being like almost like bragging rights when you're early in, but then later on you realize, yeah, not really, because there's some construction companies with 80% lumber and cogs that might be a $20 million company, but really it's like a $1 million company. They just have all their expenses in there.
Right. Exactly. The devil's in the details of anything.
Yeah.
So, you did the agency game for a while, and then you decided to jump right back in again. So what was the catalyst for going back in, but also, pivoting to focus on this B2B podcasting angle?
I started a podcast, many years in for the business. I needed thought leadership. I needed content. And, I'd done the whole thing where you'd write a blog post on LinkedIn and either 12 people see it or 1,200 people see it. But was the difference was like, random sometimes, or what image you put on there, which was just so lame. So I was like, what's an easy way to do that? So I just went after it, just launched the podcast, and there was no group like what we have now to advise you. There's like audio nerds. Here's the mic to get, man. But no one's there to tell you like, how do you do this as a business and what business outcomes can you achieve? And so I just winged it, and I had, some great success with it, man. I used it I know you have a book. I used it to write my book. interviewing different people. Each month, I had a theme of people that I'd interview, and then I'd combine those interviews into a webinar, and then that webinar became the basis for the text of the chapter in each book. So after 12 months, I had 12 chapters, and all on a theme around marketing automation. It worked really well. And it also became like a capstone project. Everything I know is in this thing so that I can go on to the next thing. But yeah, so a ton of content. That actually very quickly became too much content, right? So content was not an issue with the pod ever again. Maybe, finding the right content or using the most of it. But what ended up happening magically, I had this amazing interview with this absolutely badass CMO of a medium-sized SaaS company. And she was awesome, great conversation. So I interview like senior level marketers on the pod. And then she was like, hey, by the way, we're offline right after a great interview. We're migrating from Marketo to Pardot. It was like, no kidding. That's what we do. And she's like, really? I'm like, yeah. And so we didn't know. Neither of us knew that project was happening. But we had just hit it off. We'd spent like an hour plus, hour and a half time together recently, had great deep conversations. And she was like, cool, let's get our teams together. We got our teams together. They scoped it out. And it was like a friends and family deal. We were like, just get it done. And it turned into like an $80,000 deal with no sales cycle, no competitor shopping, anything. It was just like, let's do this deal for my friend. And I told my team, hey, let's take good care of them. And she told her team, let's work with these guys. And we just made it happen. And I thought, that's awesome. And that was on accident. What if I made that on purpose? What if I actually selected the kind of guests I wanted to talk to, build relationships with? Not like, let me trick you into a call. It's like, no, let me get to know you. And if I can solve some of your problems, I'm here for you, right? So we started handpicking. We found all the people with Pardot in North America, right? Use a little bit of code tracking to see who had the code on their site, rank ordered it by size, invited the top 100 companies that had Pardot, invited all their CMOs to be a guest on my podcast. And, the majority of them said yes, made some great relationships, got some friendships out of them, partnerships, referrals, and a lot of customers out of that. And it was so much fun to do it that way, right? Instead of playing all those games that we historically have to play in the marketing world, all those B2B games. Let me give you a blanket to meet your boss. I'm going to give them socks, and then they're going to remember me, and then maybe they'll get on a call with my sales rep. Like all this BS. I was like, let's just skip that and do one of these things where we just have a pod, we connect with our customer, and we learn more about them. And then if we can do business and help each other out, let's do it. So for me, it was so different than all the games I was playing doing marketing automation, that when I had a chance to exit that company, it was like, no brainer. Let's do this pod thing. People had started asking me the same way they'd asked me with Pardot. Hey, cool story about your podcast. Can you help me with that too? I was like, I'd love to. Let's figure this thing out. So I had a chance to do an iteration again in another company and start over, but help people launch podcasts.
What are, the biggest myths that you think around podcasts? That you dispel?
It's all about the listeners, right? And we get this, whether it's B2C, B2 anything, B2G, D2C, any of these things, it's all about like, you get so fixated on the vanity metrics and wanting to be famous and wanting to have those stats. But it's so counterintuitive. If you do it the right way, if you make the guest the most important person, it doesn't matter if anyone listens, right? If the listens matter, you're competing with Joe Rogan and he's going to win, and Tim Ferriss and everyone else. You're not going to win that, right? You might. I know one out of many, many, many people might, but you're not. It's like trying to compete with Mr. Beast. It's not going to work. Don't do it. But you don't need to, because if you make it all about your guest, and your guest, going in, is someone you could actually help out, your team could help out, then let's make a relationship with them. And if the value of the whole program is in that conversation and a connection with the guest, then you've paid for the episode just by having that conversation. But guess what? People do actually listen, and they really like when they're listening to a show that's not pandering. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Joe and other people are successful, is they don't care if you listen or not, right? And so it's like, hey, my guest is most important. I don't care if you listen or not. The show is for me. I want to learn. And if you learn too, cool. And people appreciate the fact that you're not just like, you're trying to make it all about them. And like, it's no, you're just I'm letting you join this conversation, but like, you can listen in, but otherwise it's me and this person. right? And so they appreciate that. And what's cool is if your guest had a great experience because you made it all about them, they're sharing it with their tribe, with their network, who's then going and listening to it. And some of them are going to stay. So you organically are growing your pod by not focusing on organically growing your pod.
And that authenticity shines through as well.
Yeah.
In the content. And I think listeners can pick up on that and
totally
that aspect of it. Totally.
If you're not into it, we always, our number one tip for hosts is never ask a question you don't want to know the answer to. If you don't ask, because your reaction to that question will be like, oh yeah, great, thanks. Or okay, or next question. It's just like, no, ask something you actually want to know. And if your audience can't follow along, that's okay. They don't need to. They don't need to listen.
Yeah, that's definitely like training a muscle memory too. Or training like you would for a sport. I think, when I first started doing the podcast, I would script all of them, have some boilerplate questions at the very least that I could fall back on.
Yeah.
But now I think it's actually more of a detriment than it is a positive, because I'd rather just have a free flowing conversation. And, it doesn't, you can still, as long as you have like your high level objectives of what you're trying to get across and can artfully sort of sprinkle it in here and there. I think that's better than trying to be super scripted. And anybody who I have come on the podcast who wants to have all the questions ahead of time, that's more like an interview. It's not really a podcast.
That's a warning sign right there. That's a red flag. Hello, red flag. This might not be the guest for you. I need all of your questions in advance. Okay. Yeah. I don't even know what the questions are all going to be. You know what? I like having the first question be the same every time. Is like kind of like your go-to, especially if it can just launch your guest into a tirade, and then maybe have some milestones after that. But at least the first one's always going to be the same, and then you just let it ride. You just go from there.
Yeah, I mean, mine's super simple. It's just give us your background. Your story. The podcast in and of itself is about entrepreneurship and your journey. So,
and tell us your story, right? You asked right at the beginning, what's your story, man?
And then from there, there's probably 50 different directions that it could be taken, depending on what that response is like. But it's also on the guest as well to be an engaged guest and provide some material. So I've definitely had some people on where they answer that question. I'm just like, man, that was tough. That was like you took it too far when it comes to distilling the message into 10-15 seconds.
Seriously, man. You know what? I love doing a prep call on my pod. I'm totally got to have you on my pod and have you experience that too. We can compare and contrast. But like, I always do a prep call, and the reason why is I've experienced those things you're talking about where your guest is just like, they're either like unbeknownst to them, they're like really boring, right? Or they like have a terrible answer that you've heard 9 times. You're just like, I can't. So I do a prep call mostly so I can tell them what I want to hear and what I don't want to hear. Like, please don't give me your resume. Like, I don't care. I'm not going to listen to it. And if I stop listening, I'm not going to ask any more good questions, right? And I actually try to avoid stories at the very beginning because I find people are historically really bad at them, So at the very beginning, I'm like, give me a nugget. Teach me something real quick so that myself and the audience are like in. And then later on, I'll ask you how you came up upon that knowledge. And that's fun. But like, man, some people, one time, one of our clients had a pod where their guests went on like a 10-minute rampage about like, I don't even know. They were just talking about some story and they never got to it, They were just sort of like telling the story that never ended. I don't know if you it's like when you have those friends who keep telling a story and you're like, dude, where's he going with this? And it's okay if they've been drinking or something. You're like, oh, okay, that explains it. But if they haven't, you're like, I need to where's the exit button for this pod?
Imagine that person, if they had been drinking, how terrible it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe be better. We don't know. We don't know the answer.
That is true. I do find that some social lubricant can help with some of the podcasts that I've watched, which unfortunately is not a reality for me being able to do things in person. But one day, I think that'd be really fun to have an in-person podcast because it would just change
totally
entirely.
For me, like you build rapport in the prep call that other podcasters like Rogan's going to throw whiskey at you. Oh, look, it's the latest whiskey from my friend who hunts deer and he has this whiskey. It's really good. Try it. Here's a cigar, right? Just to sort of build that rapport and loosen people up so they'll actually say something or two on the pod, not just have those little answers. One of the things I found is if people give you those quick little quick answers, short answers can really lower the energy of the pod. And so I'm always trying to find where do I get those meaty answers? And I find that if people aren't in that place where their passion and their expertise overlaps, that's when I tend to get those short answers. And so on the prep, I'm always listening for, okay, do they want to talk about this? They do. Okay, cool. Can they? Do they have any layers beneath that? Or they're like, yeah, I love, SEO. It's like, no, you don't. Like me, I hate SEO and I know something about it. So don't ask me because I don't want to talk about it. But I could, but I don't want to. But or it's like asking me about a P&L statement. Yeah, I could talk about it. Am I as experienced as a fractional CFO? No. You probably should ask them instead, right? So those topics, no. But if you say, Casey, tell me about pods, and I'm like, blah, 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 blah. So like a prep can be great for identifying what you want to chat about.
Yeah, definitely. I think the prep is something that we could incorporate. It's just always a function of time.
Totally.
As a business owner, that's a big component, and that's also why I'm sure a lot of people work with you is because they don't have the time. I mean, part of it's time, part of it's expertise, obviously, but that was why so many people would work with us with Shopify. It's not like they couldn't learn how to do it or they couldn't figure it out themselves. It would just take them 10 times as long and probably 10 times as much money versus just using an expert to be able to leverage that. So,
I was talking to someone today. He asked me the same thing. He was like, "Oh, that makes total sense. It seems so easy." And the question he didn't ask it, but it was kind of like, "So why should I have you guys? Why don't I just go to use Fiverr in the meantime?" And I was like, "Dude, go do that." But the problem is, as you're learning, the 400 episodes between where you're at and where you would be at if you're working with us, like you're gonna look like an idiot. So that could be okay, but if you want to skip all that, right? Even with you, like if you want to skip all the stupid emails and all the in all the non-successful results, but what ends up happening is people pod fade, right? If they don't see those results right away, like, oh, this is lame. Only 12 people are listening and it looks dumb. And, I'm just going to quit. And so, you definitely want to work with like the pros if you want it to work.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and joining us and taking the time. I think, the one thing that I'd love for you to cover before we hop is just like as a business owner, what types of businesses should be thinking about podcasting? Are there areas where you've seen it perform well and others where it doesn't perform well? Who's the one that should be contacting you versus who's the one that should not be?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't have a flowery answer of like everyone. I kind of do feel like everyone should use it, but the real answer is that it depends on the value of that connection. If the guest you're connecting with could turn into a 20 is typically we say $20,000 or more. Either it's like a single deal, it's a partnership, reseller deal, any kind of relationship that could be at least 20K every year for you, then it's worth it. Where it tends to fall apart is, again, back toward that Rogan days. We have done pods for people where it's a cool concept, but they have this store and people have to buy you have to have a whole bunch of people listening to have a certain number of people go to your store, to have a certain number of people buy the CBD there, right? So like just the sheer number, and you're competing now with everyone else's ears, everyone else's podcast. So the B2C can really fall apart. So B2C has to really think about reseller partners or, some co-branded folks or some folks that might distribute them or resell them. So you really need to think about a relationship where that can really work. Someone who might be just driving business your way. And again, I love partnerships. So that works great. They have to have value. Now, the company that I talked to recently where, one deal takes forever, but it's $100K, it's a no-brainer because in that case, like our services are like a rounding error as a part of that, cost of acquisition.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you walking us through it. I'm obviously a big proponent of podcasts. I think that they can be beneficial well beyond just who listens to them. I mean, it's a source of content. It's a source of, getting to meet and connect with new people. And, the benefits are far beyond just how many people are listening to it. Though it wouldn't be, the end of the world if as many people that listen to Joe Rogan listen to my podcast.
And they should.
Yeah. I don't know if I'm that cool, but I'll take it. I'll take it.
Well, yeah, you didn't offer me any whiskey or cigar. So yeah, you're almost there. 8 out of 10.
next time, round two. Well, I appreciate you coming on. Before we hop, can you let everybody know where they could find you and connect with you online?
Yeah, totally. So the website is ringmaster.com. Shoot me a note on chat. I'm Casey at ringmaster.com. If you just want to pick my brain on pods and, hey, you want to do it yourself, but like just curious, what are some of the ways that people can really screw it up? Just shoot me a note. I'm happy to give you my advice, shoot you a video, whatever, however I can help. Pods are great. I just want to connect the world one podcast at a time. So shoot me a note. My podcast, which I want to get you on there so we could link to it one day. But yeah, it's called the Hardcore Marketing Show, and the core is spelled like the Marine Corps. So CORPS, 2 words. So Hardcore Marketing. Maybe there's a link in the show notes, but either way, check that show out. That's a lot of what I do. And one day soon we'll get you on there, Brandon.
Awesome. I appreciate it. Well, again, thanks for coming on. For everybody listening, as always, this is Brandon Amoroso. You can find me at brandonamoroso.com or scaleless.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.